The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword.
7 words. That is all it takes. 7 words spoken on horseback in a cold forest. And for the first time in this show, you understand exactly what kind of man is going to die. Ned Stark does not say this line to explain a tradition. He says it to transfer something. A weight. A specific psychological demand he has been carrying his entire adult life. The demand that power must be felt, not just exercised. And if you watch this scene without knowing what he is actually doing, you miss the most precise, psychological diagnosis Game of Thrones ever wrote into a single sentence.
The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword.
That is moral ownership. The clinical term for the internal state where a person refuses to let process, hierarchy, or tradition absorb the psychological cost of their decisions. It means the weight stays in your hands, not on a form, not on a subordinate, not on a chain of command. Ned is not quoting a rule. He is describing the one demand he makes of himself above all others, and he is now placing it on his 10-year-old son because he believes it is the only thing that separates a lord from a tyrant. The difference between those two things in this line is the word should. To calculate the atmospheric pressure of this wolfswood clearing outside Winterfell, we must understand what is at stake between a father and a son who have never had a conversation like this before. Bran is 10 years old. This morning began with archery practice and his sister embarrassing him in front of his brothers. An hour later, he is sitting on a horse watching a man lower his head onto a tree stump. He did not choose this. His father chose it for him, overruled his mother, called him into the forest, and now stands 20 feet away with a greatsword in his hand. Everything Bran understood about his father before this moment, the quiet authority, the measured voice, the gravity that fills a room without filling it loudly, is about to acquire a specific shape.
Ned, 10 is too young to see such things.
He won't be a boy forever, and winter is coming.
Catelyn knows exactly what she is trying to stop. She is not being soft. She is being specific. She knows what this kind of early exposure does to a child, and she knows her husband well enough to know that once he says winter is coming in that tone, the argument is over. Ned is not bringing Bran to this execution to punish him or to be brutal. He is bringing Bran because he believes the alternative, a lord who has never felt the weight of what lordship produces, is more dangerous than the sight of a man's death. What does Ned need from this moment? He needs Bran to be present, not brave, not unmoved. Present. He needs his son to understand that the authority attached to their name is not decoration. It is a cost that must be paid by the person who holds it, every time, in person. And he needs to model something his own father once modeled for him in a cold forest very much like this one. Something no court in the South has ever understood.
Do you have to?
He swore an oath, Cat.
Law is law, milady.
Catelyn's argument is institutional. Law is law. The system handles this. Ned's response is not institutional. It is personal. He swore an oath, Cat. Not, the law requires his execution. He swore. The oath matters because oaths are made by people, broken by people, and answered by people, not by processes. This distinction is the entire philosophy of the line Ned is about to speak, compressed into 4 words, and Bran, sitting on that horse, is about to receive the full version. The line arrives in a teaching voice. Ned is not angry, not ceremonial, not performing grief. He is precise. The execution is over, the body is behind them, the horses are moving, and Ned rides up alongside Bran with the energy of a man who has been waiting for exactly this moment, at exactly this distance from what just happened, to say the thing that matters. On first watch, the line reads as a warrior's code. The North is the North. Old ways, cold lands, words that carry weight because the people who speak them mean them completely. It fits perfectly into the aesthetic of the world the show is building. Ned Stark as the last honest man, the last lord who runs his house on principle rather than politics. The execution, in this reading, is Ned doing what lords do. The lesson, in this reading, is Ned telling Bran, this is what we are. That reading is not wrong. It is incomplete in one specific way. The line is not describing what Ned does. It is prescribing what every lord should do. including lords he has never met, in rooms he has barely visited, making decisions that kill people he will never see. The word should is doing enormous work. Should implies that it is not happening. Should implies Ned knows the gap between what power demands and what power delivers. And that gap, between should and does, is where every villain in this show operates.
You understand why I did it?
Jon said he was a deserter.
But do you understand why I had to kill him?
Our way is the old way.
Listen to how Ned corrects Jon. Jon gives the legal answer, deserter, therefore death. Ned does not confirm it. He redirects. Not why I did it. Why I had to kill him. Myself. That distinction is the entire mechanism of the line. The doing is the point. The personal execution is the point. Jon answered with institutional logic. Ned is trying to teach something the institution cannot contain. Beneath the surface, this line is not about execution at all. It is about what Ned is terrified of becoming. Not a violent man. He is already that, as all lords of this era must be. He is terrified of becoming a comfortable man, a man so insulated from the results of his own authority that his judgment slowly, invisibly, corrupts, because the body is never in the room when the decision is made, and the face is never in the room when the sword falls. He has seen this. He knows exactly what detached authority produces. He watched it happen to rulers across the continent while he was fighting Robert's rebellion, men who ordered thousands of deaths from the safety of castles and woke up clean the next morning because the blood was on someone else's hands. Ned considers that a moral catastrophe. Not because he thinks killing is wrong, because he thinks killing without weight is wrong. And the only way to keep the weight is to hold the sword yourself.
I know I broke my oath. And I know I'm a deserter. I should have gone back to the wall and warned them, but I saw what I saw. I saw the White Walkers.
Watch what Ned does during Will's confession. He does not look away. He does not fidget. He does not perform the gravity of the moment for the men behind him. He simply stands there on his horse and receives every word. The guilt, the justification, the fear, the plea. He gives Will the dignity of being heard completely before the sentence is carried out. That is not procedural. That is personal. Ned is making sure that when the sword falls, it falls with full information, full knowledge of who this man was, what he believed, and what he was afraid of. This is what psychic distance reduction does when applied correctly. The clinical term comes from command psychology and interrogation training. The deliberate collapse of the gap between the decision maker and the consequence. When that gap is wide, decision quality degrades because the human brain is wired to protect itself from the psychological cost of choices it cannot feel. Ned's sword in his own hand is the structural refusal of that protection. He is choosing to feel the cost every time, as the mechanism by which he ensures he is making the right call. What the line cannot say openly, what the subtext contains, is this. Leadership without accountability is cowardice wearing authority's clothes. Every king who sends a headsman and goes back to his wine. Every lord who signs a warrant and delegates the physical act to a subordinate. Every commander who orders thousands to march into positions he designed from a map table. Ned considers all of them structurally corrupted, not evil, corrupted, because the distance between their orders and their outcomes has made them incapable of accurately calibrating the cost of what they decide. He has never said this aloud to anyone. He says it now to his youngest son, in 7 words on a horse in the Wolf's Wood.
Is it Trees or the White Walkers?
The White Walkers have been gone for thousands of years.
So he was lying.
Bran tries to resolve the moral weight by making Will the problem. If Will was lying, or mad, then the execution was clean. Ned refuses him that exit. A madman sees what he sees. He does not give Bran a verdict. He gives Bran the same burden he carries himself. The inability to make a death simple after you have stood in front of the person who is dying. That is the lesson that follows the lesson, not just hold the sword. But do not let the sword give you permission to stop thinking about what you just did. In August of 1415, Henry V of England rode to the front of his own line at Agincourt. He did not observe from a hill. He did not command through intermediaries. He wore armor, carried weapons, and fought alongside men who were cold, sick, and outnumbered by a factor of 3. He was nearly killed twice. He did not care, because he understood that the compact between a commander and the people he commands requires the commander to share the danger of the orders he gives. Not symbolically, physically. Contrast that with Louis XVI of France, a king so architecturally separated from the consequences of his decisions that, when the consequences arrived, and they always arrive, he did not understand why. He delegated justice. He delegated taxation. He delegated the enforcement of policies his own court designed. He died by guillotine in January 1793, executed by a machine his own government had commissioned to make death more humane, operated by men he had never spoken to, for decisions made by committees he had appointed. The distance between Louis's orders and Louis's hands was not dignity. It was the mechanism of his own destruction.
If you get word to my family, tell them I'm no coward. Tell them I'm sorry.
Ned is building Henry V's architecture. He is refusing Louis XVI's structure. And in 1963, a psychologist at Yale named Stanley Milgram proved exactly why the structure matters, why it is not a matter of character, but of design. Milgram's subjects administered what they believed were lethal electric shocks to strangers, not because they were sadists, but because an institutional authority figure stood between them and the result. Remove that buffer, put the person administering the shock in the same room as the person receiving it, and compliance collapsed immediately. The buffer is the mechanism of atrocity. Ned's entire philosophy removes the buffer. This is Milgram compliance inverted. The term names the documented human tendency to commit acts one would otherwise refuse, specifically because a chain of institutional distance provides moral cover. Cersei understands this intuitively and weaponizes it. She never touches the violence she orders. Joffrey weaponizes it sadistically. He orders deaths precisely because someone else must carry the weight. Tywin built his entire military and political career on it, the architect who never holds the tool. Ned refuses it as a moral position, which means he is constitutionally incapable of operating in a court that runs on it as a primary language of power. The fourth term here is Memento mori, Latin for remember that you will die. Roman generals kept a slave beside them during triumph parades with one function: to whisper those 3 words as the crowd cheered. Not to diminish the victory. To protect the general's judgment against the corruption of glory, the same corruption that makes a ruler forget that orders produce bodies. Ned forcing Bran to watch is a one-generation memento mori. Ned forcing himself to swing is a lifelong one. Neither is about cruelty. Both are about keeping the mind in contact with the reality of what power does.
Sentence you to die.
Bran does not look away. That is the moment the lesson begins to land, not when Ned speaks it, but when Bran holds his eyes open against every instinct telling him to close them. Robb's nod is not approval of the death. It is recognition that his brother just passed the first version of the test of presence, the test of staying in the room, in the body, in the weight of what lordship actually means. In a show where kings will spend 6 more seasons ordering death from dining tables and throne rooms, a 10-year-old boy on a horse in the snow just did something most of them will never do.
You understand why I did it?
But here is what the show never told you. In A Game of Thrones, the novel, this is not Ned's philosophy. It is Rickard Stark's philosophy first. Ned did not arrive at this code through reflection or experience or the study of better rulers. He was built into it. Rickard Stark, Ned's father, taught him the same lesson in the same cold forests before Ned was old enough to understand the weight of what he was receiving. The Stark code of personal accountability is not one man's moral stance. It is a generational transmission, a piece of architecture passed from lord to son across however many generations it took to build Winterfell into the institution it became. The show removes this almost entirely. In the show, the line lands as Ned's personal principle. Admirable, singular, his. In the novel, the reader understands through Ned's internal voice that he is doing exactly what Rickard showed him. The words he speaks to Bran are words that were first spoken to Ned. The lesson is not invented in this clearing. It is inherited. And that changes the weight of the line from principle to genealogy, from something Ned chose to something Ned is, in the same way his bones are what they are because of everything that built them. The show also omits a detail from this scene that George R.R. Martin includes in the novel. Bran notices Theon Greyjoy laughing as the head rolls, grinning. One of Ned's own ward's first visible reactions to death at Winterfell is amusement. Martin plants this in the same paragraph as Ned's lesson. Ned preaching moral ownership 20 feet away from the boy who will one day betray Robb Stark and burn Winterfell to prove he belongs somewhere. The show removes that grin. Martin keeps it because Martin is making a structural argument. Ned's lesson lands on some children and slides completely off others, and the ones it slides off will spend the rest of the series proving exactly why the lesson was necessary. The generational nature of the code also changes how hamartia operates in this story, though that term belongs to the next section. What matters here is this. Ned cannot choose to set this code down when it costs too much, because the code was not a choice. It was an inheritance, and inheritances do not negotiate with hostile environments. They either hold or they break. In Winterfell, the code holds. In King's Landing, it breaks Ned. Not because the code is wrong, but because no one in King's Landing speaks that language.
The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword.
There is a behavioral pattern embedded in this line that shows up in every organization where power is real and consequences are high. And almost no one talks about it in those terms. When the people who make decisions are architecturally insulated from the results of those decisions, the decisions get worse. Not because the decision makers are malicious, because they are human. And human beings calibrate their choices against the feedback they can feel. A general who has never been under fire makes different tactical choices than one who has. A CEO who has never worked the factory floor makes different labor decisions than one who has. A doctor who has never been a patient makes different treatment recommendations than one who has. The psychological mechanism is identical to what Ned is describing. The further the person who gives the order is from the outcome of that order, the more likely the order is to be wrong, because the cost is never felt in the body of the person who determines the cost. Henry V at Agincourt made decisions at the front of his line that commanders on hills cannot make, because the ground under his boots was real, not strategic. That is not a metaphor. That is a documented pattern across military history, organizational psychology, and political theory stretching from Agincourt in 1415 to every modern study of executive decision-making under separation of consequence. Ned Stark figured it out in a forest in the north, on horseback, in 7 words. The 5th term that names his fate is hamartia, from Greek classical tragedy, the single quality in a hero that is simultaneously their greatest strength and the direct mechanism of their destruction. Not a mistake they make, a thing they are. Ned's moral ownership is his power in the north. The reason his men follow him, the reason his word holds weight, the reason Winterfell is the one place in Westeros where the Lord's authority is not performative. And it is his death warrant in King's Landing, the reason he cannot play the game, cannot delegate the violence, cannot let process absorb the cost of what he decides. Same quality. 2 completely different worlds. One of them kills him. You came into this video knowing Ned Stark was honorable. You are leaving it knowing something more precise. Ned Stark was running a deliberate anti-atrocity system inside his own body. A code that kept his judgment clean by keeping his hands in contact with the results of his decisions, every time, by design. The line was never about killing. It was about what power does to the mind of the person who holds it when no one forces them to feel the weight. Ned felt the weight. He forced Bran to feel it. He forced himself to feel it every time he unsheathed ice. And now that you know that, the next time you watch any scene in this show where Ned picks up a sword, you will not be watching an execution. You will be watching a man perform the same act of psychological discipline he has been performing his entire adult life. The act his father taught him, the act his son will one day inherit. Every Ned execution scene is a callback to this line. Every Jon execution scene is the inheritance. Watch those scenes again and count the cost in the face of the man who swings.
You did well.
Here is the question that does not have a clean answer. If Ned had been willing to bend this principle once, just once, in King's Landing, when Joffrey held his life in his hands, would he have survived? Or was the code so structural, so inherited, so built into what he was, that bending it would have produced a version of Ned Stark who was no longer capable of being Ned Stark at all? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you in the next.